Here's a quote out of a local paper in North Dakota. It says, North Dakota is a sparsely populated state of less than 700,000, known for cold weather, isolated farmers, and the hit movie Fargo. Yet, for some reason, it defies the real estate cliche of location, location, location. Since 2000, the state's GMP, gross product, has grown 56%. Personal income has grown 43%, and wages have grown 34%. This year, the state has a budget surplus of $1.2 billion. And you believe from your research, a lot of that has to do with it having a state bank. Break that down and explain the difference between a state bank and, say, J.P. Morgan.
Well, this would be a state-owned bank. Of course, all states have state banks.
I mean a state-owned bank.
State-owned bank. North Dakota is the only state that owns its own bank, and it's owned it since 1919. It was set up under circumstances very similar to what we have today. It was a populist movement. The farmers were losing their farms to the Wall Street bankers, and when they realized that their money was going out of state and that it was actually being fraudulently taken, that the farmers were not being able to sell their perfectly good grain to the granaries, which were a cartel with the railroads, which were a cartel with the banks. It was all one big cartel. Back, the Rockefeller days. When they figured that out, they banded together, formed a political party, which they called the Nonpartisan League. It was neither right nor left. It was just a group of farmers trying to keep their own credit in their own state. So all the states could have the same sort of flourishing GDP that they have, but we are all suffering from a credit crisis that was precipitated in Wall Street because the Wall Street banks got in trouble with their dodgy collateral, et cetera. So North Dakota just escaped all that. By law, all the state revenues go into the Bank of North Dakota. So they have a huge potential deposit base, and it's set up as North Dakota doing business as the Bank of North Dakota. So it's set up as a DBA. Technically, all of the assets of the state are the assets of the bank. So it's got a huge potential capital base, a huge deposit base, and it can leverage that into many times that sum in loans.
And so they have the fractional reserve power to empower the people, and that way the money stays in the state. It's not sold into derivatives to Thailand or to Russia or to England, and so you have sovereignty and you have transparency. Instead of, take the state of Texas, takes most of the tax money, invest it in secretive funds and derivatives, and then the comprehensive annual financial reports show they've got a double set of books, and that was okay, though it gave the bankers great power, the private bankers, when the derivatives were on the way up. But now the states are all bankrupt because the bankers set them up. They swindled all the tax money investments, and so now we're defunct just where the bankers wanted us. So in this big states' rights movement, we need to move to have other states look at state banks. That is, where the state's money is in a public bank. Stay there. We'll be right back. All right, Ellen, this is a short segment, long segment coming up, but this is so important. I know it's not basketball or football or getting drunk for new listeners out there that may be tuning in, but it's getting control of our lives. If we let offshore banks have the power to issue all the currency and credit they want, they're going to take over, and they have, and announce themselves our rulers and a new empire. And they're very corrupt, wicked people who also believe in eugenics. So we must take our states back to get our federal government back. And the example of North Dakota is a great case point example. Now you've written about this in your book. You've got webofdebt.com. Let's walk through what a state bank is. Not a state chartered bank, but a bank of the state that's transparent, and how this could be rolled out in other states.
In North Dakota, as I mentioned, all of the revenues of the state go into the bank, and then those become the deposits. Plus, they take depositors from individuals, or take deposits. So, the way banking works, the bank just makes loans to anybody it wants to make loans to. But then when the checks go out of the bank, they have to clear through a clearing house, usually the Federal Reserve, but the Bank of North Dakota isn't actually a member of the. Well, I guess they are a member, but they don't have FDIC insurance, and they don't use it. So anyway, so the checks have to clear by, you have to have the same amount going in the way of deposits as you have going out. As far as I can see, that's really just a ruse to make it look like you're not creating money on your books, because those deposits coming in are like Mr. Smith's check that just came in is not the money that Mr. Jones has going out in the form of a check. In other words, Mr. Smith never said that Mr. Jones could borrow his money. And you never go into the bank and they say, I'm sorry, we just lent your money out for 30 years, come back later. They always have the money. It's because they have this sort of fungible pool, and they make that pool sort of serve all purposes.
Well, the goldsmiths discovered 500 years ago that they would hold your gold because you didn't want to keep it in your house, and then they could give you the receipts, and that no one hardly ever came in at once wanting all their gold. And even if a few people did, you still had enough, so that's what allowed it. But explain to people how a state bank like North Dakota has empowers the people and how it works and how it's different from the system that the private bankers have.
Okay, in North Dakota, the state bank is actually pretty much a banker's bank. They do make some commercial loans, but mostly they are partnering with the other banks. So where all the other state banks have a capital problem because of the Bank for International Settlements capital requirement and the fact that they had this dodgy collateral on their books that froze the whole credit mechanism, et cetera. It used to be that there were secondary lenders called shadow lenders, the investors who would buy these collateralized debt obligations, which are bundled mortgages, off the banks, and then that would clear their books, and they could make another set of loans and another set of loans, all based on the same capital. But when those shadow lenders went away, the banks were stuck with the limits of their original capital, so that froze up credit. Well, in North Dakota, the Bank of North Dakota serves as it partners with those banks, and it takes the loans off their books, making room for more and more. So generally, the community banks, the local banks, are dealing directly with the customers, and then the Bank of North Dakota, it backstops those banks, rather like the Federal Reserve does. It's sort of like the mini Fed for the state.
Yeah, it's the insurance policy, but you know, not just the Bank of North Dakota. We see local state banks that are private being much more healthy than the big mega banks that created these derivatives. And under the new bank re-regulation legislation, actually written by Goldman Sachs and others, it allows them to come in and take over the healthy state or regional banks.
Right.
So we see a major consolidation taking place here.
Right. So that if you have a state bank, it can help those struggling little banks that are struggling with. Now they're talking about raising the capital requirement. They're making it even more difficult for the little local banks, and so the state bank can help with that. One major advantage is that all the interest goes back to the state. So in North Dakota, it's actually a big moneymaker for the state. They get a big dividend every year, so that reduces the amount of taxes that people have to pay. But plus, it's got a mission statement that is geared toward helping the state. So where a private bank, like any corporation, has to serve its shareholders. So if Goldman Sachs can make more money speculating in derivatives than in making commercial loans to businesses that might go bankrupt, they have to speculate. That's what their business model is. They have to serve their private shareholders.
And they have lobbyists at the state level getting the state to invest tax money in their system, giving them more power. Stay there. Let's come back and talk about how we roll this out in other states and if you're starting to see this being discussed in other states.